Every time a new fad diet comes out or a new trend for weight loss comes out, you always hear these people being like, oh, this one's new and it's gonna work because X, Y, and Z, right? But I'm here to tell you that there's nothing new under the sun. I did a deep dive into some of the history of dieting and where it came from and where all of this push started, that you have to lose weight and you have to use X, Y, and Z to lose weight, etc. And it's been going on for a really long time. It didn't work then and they're not gonna work now. Fad diets are not the answer. So I'll go into some of what I found. There's actually even more detail, and I'll put the full timeline that I found in a link in the description just so that you can see. But let's just kind of start from the beginning of some of the first recorded fad diets. So there's a little bit of a history before this, but I'm gonna start here because this is the first one that was really promoted for weight loss that didn't fall more into the eating disorder category. Just a really brief history. Like, even before what I'm about to tell you, there was a lot of push to starve yourself and use laxatives and things like that as a way to lose weight. But I specifically want to talk today about diets that people were pushing as a way to lose weight. So, first and foremost, vegetarianism. That has been promoted as a way to lose weight since 1730. And it was by a guy named Dr. George Chain. And he said that the only way that you're gonna lose weight is if you go vegetarian, that you shouldn't be eating meat. That's recycled through, of course, but that was kind of one of the first things that came out. Now, the next one was actually fasting, binge eating, and drinking vinegar and water every morning. Does that sound familiar? So this guy named Lord Byron was a very attractive dude and people wanted to look like him. And so in 1820, he shared what he did, and that's what he did. He would starve himself, binge eat. The frequency of his binge eating wasn't super clear. And then he would drink vinegar in water every single morning and sometimes soak vinegar in other things because he was convinced that vinegar was the way that he was staying thin. Now, the next one is actually a low carb diet. That's not new. That's recycled hundreds of times in lots of different ways over the year. But in 1825 was the first time that people said that you should do a low carb diet. And they actually said, and I quote, fat people should not be eating potatoes and starches. They're not allowed to. Crazy stuff. Moving on, then they suggested that you should be weighing and measuring all of your food. This doctor named Dr. A.W. Moore in 1856 suggested that that was the only way that you were going to stay thin, and he wrote a book, and in the back of the book, he put it there so that you could log and measure all of your food and your body weight. Then we keep going, and then we find there's diet pills and supplements. In the 1880s, a doctor named Dr. Watson Bradshaw made a powder that had a lot of lard in it and stuff. Basically, it just made you poop, and he suggested that this would make you thin. So that started a little bit of a trend into other diet pills and supplements and ointments and balms that they said were gonna make you lose all of this weight. And then that also transitioned to machines and massagers that would make you ooze fat. In 1833, a guy named Dr. Gustav Zander created a belt that would jiggle your body, and he said it would jiggle your fat away. I'm smiling while I'm reading you these because I've heard all of these things even just in the past 10 years, so it's crazy they've been going on this long. Anyways, we'll continue through the timeline. Then we jump ahead a little bit to early 1900s. So from about 1905 to 1930 is really when you could argue that there were the first influencers as it pertained to diet. So there was this guy named Horace Fletcher, and he was an art dealer. Nothing to do with weight or doctor or nutrition or anything like that. He was an art dealer, and he suggested that the way you should stay thin is by chewing your food excessively. He said for every bite, you should chew it 32 times, basically make it form a liquid in your mouth, and then spit out the rest. And this got really popular because John D. Rockefeller started doing it with him, and Kellogg, the guy who created Kellogg's cereal, did it with him, and they were prominent people of the time. So they were kind of our first influencers. They did this diet because I guess their friend or colleague, Horace, was doing it, and then it spread. So people started doing this, and it was called Fletcherism because remember, his name was Horace Fletcher. So then we're still kind of in the early 1900s, and remember in 1920-ish is when Lulu Hunt Peters suggested that you count your calories. I've talked about her many times, but she's the one who first suggested you eat 1,200 calories and that you should be following that in order to lose weight and counting and weighing and measuring and only thinking of food and calories. So that was back in 1920. And then, and this one is one of my favorites because of course this is something that a lot of people are like, oh, this is new. The Alkaline Diet. A guy named Dr. William Hay in 1935 suggested that the way to lose weight was to balance the alkaline and acidic foods that you eat, and that's how you're gonna lose weight. I'm sorry, I can't help but smile because it's so ironic. So then we keep going, and then in the early 1930s, even up to the 1950s, is really when Hollywood started popularizing different diets. So they suggested the grapefruit diet, they suggested master cleanses and juice cleanses, and then they also suggested that you drink water with lemon juice, maple syrup, and cayenne pepper 12 times a day to lose weight. Does that not sound like something that you're hearing now? So that's kind of the history of where all these diets came from. But then what I find really interesting is that in the 1950s, scientists in the UK were like, we've got to stop this. They were doing a lot of research into these diets and all of these different trends. And they basically said, hey, none of these diets work. They're heartless. Some of them are inhumane. They're unrealistic and they're out of date. That was in the 1950s, referring to all of these things that I just suggested before. And yes, there's other diets out there that aren't included in this timeline, but I really want you to challenge your thoughts around this because that whole timeline that I just listed to you is a lot of different diets that are popularized today. And even back in the 1950s, they suggested and they researched that they didn't work, they weren't going to be successful, and they were out of date. Yet we're still bringing them back as the new thing to try. Remember, the only thing that's going to work for you, whether or not you're in recovery or working on some sort of athletic goal or weight loss or whatever it might be, is to work on consistency, a true lifestyle change, not those fad diets that say they're a lifestyle change, but really they're starvation, and working with a dietitian and probably therapist to get that support. You can do it, but don't fall for the fad diets. Thanks so much for being here, guys. I would love to hear your thoughts on this video in the comments, since this to me was super interesting to learn about.